something that had been hidden for a long time. He said he was going to expose it. Expose what? He didn't say, but the next day, he was dead. And when I examined his workshop, I found that someone, member of the Bell family, and if anyone knew the truth about what had happened to her sister Eliza in 1894, it would be her. The nursing home was a large, clean building surrounded by gardens. Mistress Bell's room was on the second floor, with a window that looked out over the grounds. She was a small woman, with white hair and pale blue eyes that still held a sharp intelligence despite her age. She was sitting in a wheelchair when Eli entered, wrapped in a blanket despite the warmth of the room. The railing had given way, and she had fallen into the sea. Whitmore concluded his letter by expressing his deep regret at the tragedy and by volunteering to resign his position if the board deemed it appropriate. The board did not accept his resignation. He continued to serve as lighthouse keeper for another 34 years. Eli read the letter several times. It was carefully worded, but it was also, in its own way, a confession. Whitmore had admitted that Eliza Bell had been at single suitcase, and he paid for 3 nights in advance, in cash. The desk clerk, a young man named Peter who had worked at the hotel for only 2 weeks, gave him a room on the 3rd floor, number 317. It was a corner room with a view of the public garden, and it had been unoccupied for several months. Mr. Crane walked to his room slowly, as if the climb were an effort. He stood at the window for a long time, looking out at the garden below, where the trees were still bare and the paths were. Found that everything was going to her husband. Robert was a young man with expensive tastes and no talent for making money, and he was not the kind of person who accepted disappointment gracefully. Riley interviewed Robert first. The young man was bitter and angry, and he had no evidence to support his accusations. He simply believed that his uncle had killed his aunt because she was worth more to him dead than alive. Riley interviewed Joseph Crane next. He found him in room 317 at the Grand. Changed. What did you think he had done? The prosecutor asked. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I thought he had killed someone. I didn't know who, but I knew it was something terrible. Chapter 6. The verdict. Joseph Crane was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. He died 3 years later, in his cell, of a heart attack. The nephew Robert inherited the fortune, after all. He blew through most of it in 5 years, on houses and cars and…
Michael stood and watched as the film reel spun, as the light from the projector beam swept across the screen, illuminating images that had not been shown at the Ritz in 50 years. He saw silent movies and early talkies, newsreels and cartoons, images of a world that had vanished. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the projector stopped, the light went out, and Michael was alone in the dark. Chapter 4. The Ghost. Over the next few weeks, more strange things. Old-fashioned dress, smiling at him. Thank you, Dorothy said. And then she was gone. Chapter 7. The Legacy. The Ritz Cinema continued to operate for another 30 years. Michael ran it until he was 70, and then his daughter took over. She was the 3rd generation of the Marsh family to manage the theater, and she had the same love for it that her father and grandfather had. The theater survived the rise of home video and the coming of streaming movies and every other change that had. Threats, but had never acted on them. He argued that the FBI had focused on the most convenient suspect and had ignored other possibilities. The jury deliberated for 3 days, and then they found Harold Dunn not guilty. Chapter 4. The Aftermath. Michael resigned from the Public Works Department the day after the trial ended. He could not continue working for a system that had failed so completely, that had allowed a saboteur to almost kill thousands of people and had then failed to convict.
Park. It had been laid out in the Victorian style, was curved paths and flower beds and a central gazebo that was now crumbling with age. But what struck Elizabeth most was a variety of plants. There were roses and lilies and chrysanthemums, but there were also species she had never seen before, plants that should not have survived in the Connecticut climate, plants that should not have existed at all. She spent the first week exploring the garden, cataloging every plant she could identify. He had solved more cases than he could count. He had seen every kind of crime, committed in every kind of way, and he had developed a sixth sense about criminals, an instinct for knowing who was guilty and who was lying. This case, however, was different. There was no forensic evidence, no fingerprints, no footprints, no DNA. The thief had been wearing gloves and a mask, and the security cameras had been disabled. It was, as far as Frank could tell, a perfect crime. He interviewed the store, waiting for someone to come back. A woman was standing on the porch. She was in her 70s, with gray hair and sharp eyes, and she was watching Mary with an expression that was difficult to read. "You must be Mary," she said. "I'm Margaret Walsh. I was your grandmother's neighbor. I'm the executor of her will." Mary got out of the car and walked up to the porch. "It's nice to meet you," she said. Margaret studied her for a long moment. "You look like her," she said. "Like Catherine. Same eyes." As Catherine had predicted, would not be ignored. It started with small things. A feeling of being watched. A sense of knowing what people were going to say before they said it. A voice in the back of her mind that was not quite her own. By the time she was 40, Mary had accepted what she was. She left her job at the hospital and went to work for a charity that helped families who had lost loved ones. She became a medium, like her grandmother before her, bringing comfort to the grieving.
From every music program she has ever attended, usually within the first month. "Why?" Clara asked. "Because she refuses to follow instructions," Margaret said. "She plays what she wants to play, not what she is told. She challenges her teachers, argues with them, refuses to do exercises she considers pointless. Several teachers have told me she is unteachable." Clara looked at the girl at the piano. She had dark hair, cut short, and she was wearing jeans and a t-shirt and no shoes. Her feet were of summer that seemed to stretch on forever, with days that were long and golden and full of the coolest pleasures of youth. Thomas had been 20 years old, a college student at Boston University, spending his vacation working at his uncle's cabin on Lake Winnipesaukee in New Hampshire. There had been a group of them that summer: Thomas, his roommate Michael, Michael's girlfriend Christine, and a girl named Diana, who was visiting from out of town. They had spent their days swimming and dined. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The person who contacted me says otherwise. This person says that you know exactly what happened. They say you were there when Diana died. They say you helped to cover it up." "That's a lie," Thomas said. He could feel his heart racing, could feel the sweat breaking out on his palms. "I didn't hurt her. I didn't cover anything up. I didn't even know she was dead until years later." Margaret studied him with those sharp, assessing eyes, then left behind all the people who had known her. But now he was not so sure. In the morning, he made phone calls. He tracked down Michael first, now a successful lawyer in Chicago, living under the name Michael O'Neill. When Thomas mentioned Diana's name, Michael went quiet. "We agreed never to talk about that," Michael said finally. "We made a deal." "What deal?" Thomas asked. "The kind you don't break," Michael said. "The kind where everyone agrees to keep quiet about the thing they all did. If you say it, but Sarah Bellamy is still out there. And as long as she's alive, there's a chance we can save her. Hadley sighed. Okay, he said. But be careful. And if you find her, call me immediately. Don't try to do anything on your own. Chapter 5. The Evidence. Marcus spent the next 2 weeks investigating Richard Bellamy. He dug through financial records and property records. He interviewed employees of Bellamy's company, a real estate development firm that had made millions over the past decade. Going to Boston, do not try to find me. His father had never tried to find him, not once in 23 years. They had not exchanged a single letter, not a single word. The silence between them had been complete and absolute, like the silence at the bottom of the sea. But now Arthur was dead, and Eli was back, and there was no one else to take care of things. The station master, an elderly man with a weathered face and a cap that said Harbor Heaven Railroad, looked at Eli with the particular. Himself, he didn't have many friends in town. He spent most of his time at the lighthouse, tending the light and doing his little projects in the workshop. What kind of projects? The sheriff hesitated. That's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about. In the last few months of his life, your father became interested in something. I'm not sure what exactly. He was spending a lot of time researching, reading old newspapers and books. He went to the library in Portland twice, which was.
She took samples and pressed them in her notebook, and she photographed everything. And slowly, a picture began to form in her mind. Clara Whitmore had been a botanical genius. She had developed hybrid plants that were unlike anything Elizabeth had ever seen. Species that combined the beauty of ornamental flowers with the hardiness of wild plants. She had created, without anyone knowing, an entirely new garden. But why had she hidden it? Why had she never published her work, never shared it? Owner, a nervous man named Samuel Klein. Klein said he had no enemies. No idea who would want to rob him. He had owned the store for 30 years, and he had never had any trouble before. Frank looked at the crime scene photos. The break-in was clean, professional. Whoever had done it knew what they were doing. Chapter 2. The Suspect. 3 days after the robbery, a man named Robert Vance walked into the police station and asked to speak to Detective Sullivan. He was 38 years old. A post office and a diner, a church with a white steeple, a town hall with a flag out front. It was a kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, and where strangers were noticed immediately. She drove up the hill to the house. It was a large Victorian structure, 3 stories tall, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and a garden that had been beautiful once but was now overgrown and wild. The windows were dark, and the house had an air of abandonment, as if it had been lived to be 87 years old. She spent her last years in the house on the hill, tending the garden and listening to the voices and helping the people who came to her from all over the world. And when she died, she left the house to her niece, with a letter and a diary and a promise that the gift would find its way. The end.
Scale, then the G major, then the F major. Her technique was good, but her playing was mechanical, lacking the warmth and the feeling that separated mere notes from music. You're thinking too much, Clara said. Music is not about correctness, it's about expression. Play it again, but this time, think about something that makes you happy. Sophie played the scale again. This time, there was something different in her playing, a lightness, a joy. Better, Clara said, much better. Chapter 2. Expensive and prestigious than the last, each one failing to understand what she needed. They all want me to be a machine, Lily said. They want me to play the notes perfectly, without feeling, without thinking, without being human. They want me to be a robot that can win competitions. And what do you want? Clara asked. Lily was quiet for a long time. I want to feel something, she said. I want to play music that makes people feel what I feel. I want to make them understand. Then that's what? Commonwealth Avenue and Camel Street are precisely 4 p.m. on the first day of April. Come alone. Tell no one. If you do not come, or if you tell anyone about this letter, the information I possess will be made public. There will be no second chances. The letter was unsigned. Thomas read it 3 times. Then he walked to the window and looked out at the snow-covered city, his heart pounding in his chest like a trapped bird. Chapter 2. The Memory. It had been a hot summer in 1984, the kind. Start talking now. It all falls apart. Everything we've built, everything we've become. It all disappears. Christine was harder to find. She had divorced Michael years ago and moved to California, where she ran a small boutique in Santa Barbara. When Thomas called her, she listened to his story in silence, and when he finished, she said only, "You should have let it go." But Thomas could not let it go. He flew to Vermont, to the town where Diana Cole was supposedly living. He found the address. The last train to Evergreen. Chapter 1. The Ticket. The ticket was handed to him by a woman he had never seen before. It was a single sheet of cream-colored paper, slightly yellowed at the edges, with a date and a destination written in elegant cursive script. The date was November 14, 1959. The destination was Evergreen. Marcus Reed looked at the ticket and then looked at the woman. She was tall and thin, with silver hair pinned up in an elaborate style, and she wore a black dress, that of books and photographs of people long dead. Sarah Bellamy came to Evergreen in May, Dorothy said. She arrived on the evening of May 14th, on the same train you took. She was alone, and she was frightened. I could see it in her eyes. She asked if there was a place she could stay, somewhere quiet where no one would find her. I told her about the cottage. What cottage? There is a small cottage, about 2 miles outside of town, in the woods by the lake. It belongs to my nephew. He lets it out. Find out his why. Chapter 2. The Town. Evergreen was a small town in upstate New York, about 4 hours north of New York City. Marcus took the train from Grand Central and arrived in the early afternoon, stepping off onto a platform that seemed frozen in time. The station was old and elegant, with high ceilings and wooden benches and a ticket office that had probably not changed since the 1920s. The town beyond the station was small and quiet. Main Street stretched out before him, lined with rocks below the lighthouse. The article noted that the circumstances of her death were unclear and that an investigation was underway. Eli read the article twice. Then he put the newspapers in his pocket alongside the photographs and went back to the lighthouse to wait for morning. Chapter 4. The Bell Sisters. The next day, Eli went to see Mrs. Lydia Bell. She was 93 years old and lived in a nursing home in Portland, a 2-hour drive from Harbor Haven. She was the last surviving, and distant, and he never told me he was proud of me, not once in my entire life. But he was also right about this. What Thomas Whitmore did was wrong, and it has gone unpunished for too long. My father wanted to expose the truth, and I'm going to finish what he started. Chapter 6. The Light. A week later, Eli stood on the rocks below the lighthouse and watched the sun go down over the Atlantic Ocean. The sky was streaked with orange and red, and the water reflected the colors like a living. Sole beneficiary in her will, Margaret put the letter back in the wastebasket. Then she finished cleaning the room and went about her work. But she could not stop thinking about the letter. Joseph Quinn had come to the hotel the day after his wife died. He had paid for 3 nights in cash. He was alone, and he was drinking, and he was waiting for something. Margaret had seen enough in her 30 years at the Grand Hotel to know when something was wrong, and something was very wrong about. He had simply been incapable of expressing it. He did not know a lot of things about Arthur Vance, and he never would. But he knew this. His father had tried to do the right thing, at the end. He had tried to expose the truth and seek justice for a woman he had never known. And for that, at least, Eli could respect him. The light from the lighthouse swept across the water, bright and steady and unwavering. And Eli Vance, standing alone on the rocks, felt something he had not expected, too.
So many other small-town cinemas. It survived because the people of Millbrook would not let it die. They came every week to sit in the dark and watch stories unfold on the screen, to escape from their lives for a few hours, to be part of something larger than themselves. And sometimes, late at night, when the theater was empty and the projector was running for no one, people said they could hear a woman's laughter from the balcony. They said it was Dorothy, still watching over the shouting and arguing and trying to figure out what to do. Michael pushed through the crowd until he reached the damaged cable. He looked at it with professional eyes, and he felt his stomach drop. This was not a normal failure. This was sabotage. Chapter 2: The Investigation. The FBI took over the case. They brought in agents from Washington, and they set up headquarters in a conference room at Boston City Hall. Michael was interviewed 3 times in the first week, and each time, he told.
Back to Chapter 4: The Husband. Michael flew back to New York the next day. He had seen enough. He knew who had taken Sarah Bellamy, and he knew why. Richard Bellamy had not sent Eleanor to find his wife because he wanted her back. He had sent her because he wanted to make sure she was really gone. The case was clearer now. Sarah Bellamy had discovered something about her husband, something that made her fear for her life. She had fled in the night and, taking only what she could carry, and she had discovered that she knew about his business. She had accidentally found documents in his office, documents that proved he had bribed a city official to win a major contract. She had confronted him with the documents, and he had panicked. He had told her that she could either destroy the documents and forget what she had seen, or she could disappear. She had chosen to run. She had taken the documents with her, hoping to use them as leverage if Richard ever came after her. She had gone, too. Walking streets that stretched for miles in every direction, living a life that his father had never approved of and had never stopped reminding him about. Arthur Vance had been dead for 9 days now. The letter from the Harbor Haven sheriff had arrived at Eli's apartment in Boston with the spare efficiency of official correspondence. Dear Mr. Vance, I regret to inform you that your father passed away on the evening of October 3rd. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience. That, me. She was the only person in the world I trusted when I ran. And she found me. She found you, Sarah said. And then she found the right person to bring you back. Michael sat with Sarah for a while, watching the children play. The ocean was calm and blue, and the sun was warm on his face. It was the kind of afternoon that made you forget all the dark things in the world, if only for a moment. Thank you, Sarah said, for everything. Marcus nodded. He did not say anything. He did not have. This letter changes things. Whitmore should have been prosecuted. But he's been dead for 24 years. There's no one to charge. No, Eli said. But there's the lighthouse. What do you mean? I mean that Thomas Whitmore got away with what he did because he was respected in this town. Because he had power, and the lighthouse was the source of that power. It was the symbol of his authority, his importance. If we tear it down, we tear down everything he built. The sheriff looked at Eli, with
species that could only survive in the specific conditions Clara had created. Without her care, without her attention, they had died. Elizabeth mourned them. She mourned the loss of beauty that the world would never see, the varieties of flower and fruit and leaf that Clara had created and that would never exist again. Chapter 6: The Ghost. The strange sound started in Elizabeth's 3rd year in the house. She would wake in the middle of the night and hear footsteps in the hallway, or something that had been taken from a jewelry store on Madison Avenue a long time ago. Frank was 81 years old. He was in poor health, and he did not get around like he used to. But when he heard about the diamonds, he found the strength to get in his car and drive to Connecticut. Maria was a nurse at the nursing home, and she was taking care of an elderly patient named Thomas Grant. He had been in the nursing home for 5 years, ever since he had been released from prison. He was dying. Saw in the hallways and the garden. About conversations she had with people who were not there, who could not be there, because they had been dead for years. And she wrote about a man named Thomas, who had been her husband in another life, in another time, who had died in a fire in the house in 1892 and who had been trying to reach her ever since. Chapter 5, The Truth. Mary read the diary in one night. By the time the sun came up, she understood what had happened to her grandmother, Catherine, in different light, and vines that grew toward human voices, and bushes that produced fruit with the taste of strawberries and bananas and pineapple all at once. And in the corner of the greenhouse, on a workbench covered with dust, she found Clara Whitmore's notebooks. They were filled with careful drawings and detailed notes, the work of a lifetime, a legacy that had been waiting for 23 years to be discovered. Chapter 4, The Legacy. Elizabeth spent the next year studying Clara. Someone else. Vance was quiet for a moment. Then he said, his name was Tony Marino. He's a professional. He's done jobs like this all over the country. And he's going to do it again. Unless you stop him. Chapter 3, The Hunt. Frank put a team on Tony Marino. They traced him to Miami, where he was living under the name Thomas Grant, a consulting engineer. He had a house on the beach and a boat in the harbor, and he spent his days playing golf and his nights in the casinos. He was good at what?
Had been in love with Michael, but Michael had been cruel to her. And she had been young and stupid and full of drama, and she had decided to fake her own death. She had taken a boat out onto the lake in the middle of the night, and she had swum to the other shore, where a car was waiting for her. She had driven away and never looked back, but something had gone wrong. The person who was supposed to pick her up had panicked and left. Diana had been stranded on the far shore, with no money and